Okay, let's start Standard 19 here. Standard 19 says the student will identify the origins, major developments, and the domestic impact of World War II, especially the growth of the federal government. This is a big, tall order to give. This is a mouthful. So we break this down into origins, the major developments, the domestic impact of World War II. It's telling us what aspects of World War II that we need to know about. It's kind of narrowing them down for us and focusing on those, and that's what we need to do. Focus on the origins of World War II. We're going to do that first. Then we're going to come and talk about some major developments that happened in the war. And then at home, domestically, we talked about this word here again, domestically, the domestic impact of World War II at home. How does World War II cause problems at home? We're going to look at that, especially the growth of the federal government. We're going to look at that too. So let's look at the whole thing all together. We have A, B, C, D, E, F. So 19 is a huge standard here. World War II. It's under Unit 7 we've been talking about. So let's go ahead and jump into the first one here, the origins of World War II, and then we'll go to A after this video. Origins of World War II, something you should have learned in world history in 9th grade, but we're going to hit it here again to try to refresh your memory. Let's look at the element here. Origins of World War II. What caused World War II to happen? Why did it happen? Why did the United States enter? That's what we want to look at. Conflict and compromise is the theme. And again, we want to talk about how the United States got involved in World War II and how World War II started itself over in Europe. So what's going to happen is, just like in World War I, we're going to have the Allied powers here, Great Britain, Russia, or Soviet Union, France here, and later on the United States. We're going to come in later, just like we always do. We drag in a little late. But here are the Allied powers. The Axis powers are not called the Central powers anymore because we've included in Asia. Japan here is over in Asia, so we can't talk about Central powers in Europe like we did in World War I. World War II, they're going to be called the Axis powers: Germany, Italy, and Japan. And the leaders of the Axis power, let's go ahead into this origins, what caused the World War II to happen. History tells us that because of the Great Depression, because of the economic Great Depression that happened in the United States, also was felt throughout the world. This economic depression, the Great Depression we talked about, is going to hurt the entire world. So we see that Germany, who lost World War I at the peak of the Great Depression, or lowest point of it, excuse me, Adolf Hitler is going to come to power. And in Italy, Benito Mussolini. These are two dictators that come to power. They're going to seize power, promising to restore their nations to greatness and to pull their nations out of the Great Depression. And in Japan, there's no one individual leader. It's actually a group of dictators kind of push the country toward expansionism, what we're going to talk about in just a second. So Adolf Hitler and Mussolini are going to work together with Japan to try to expand out into Europe and in Asia and try to take over places and colonize these places and subject them to their authority. So that's what's going to happen. This expansionistic policies, because of the Great Depression, is going to cause World War II to occur. Here's Benito Mussolini of Italy and Adolf Hitler of Germany together, working together in their purpose, and we're going to talk about that in a few moments. So expansion was the real culprit that caused World War II. Expansion was a reaction to how those countries are being hurt by the Great Depression. Adolf Hitler, well, actually, in 1935, earlier, Benito Mussolini attempted, his country went into Ethiopia and invaded Ethiopia, trying to take Ethiopia out, because what Benito Mussolini in Italy wanted to do is establish colonies within Ethiopia and then extract or exploit from those places the goods it needed to survive during the Great Depression. So they invaded. They're going to expand into Ethiopia and Africa, and they're going to try to take over a bunch of African countries. That's what they were attempting to do. So that's expansionism by Benito Mussolini. In Germany, let's talk about this first. The League of Nations that was created in World War One. When this happened, they did absolutely nothing about it. They did not react. They did not send in troops. Nothing. And so that gave Adolf Hitler of Germany the initiative to go ahead with his pursuits of expansion. And then in 1936, he sent the German military into the Rhineland. In the Treaty of Versailles, Germany promised and signed and agreed not to militarize Germany again. Well, Adolf Hitler goes against that and sends the military into the Rhineland, and in a minute we're going to look at where the Rhineland is in Germany. And that was a violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Then, right after that, he's going to get a little more aggressive, and he's going to attack Poland and take over Poland. And it's at that moment when he takes over Poland that Great Britain and France declare war on Germany, and then he turns on France and completely takes France over, and then is bombing Great Britain when we finally agree to help out a little bit. But that's on down in the standards a little. Okay, Benito Mussolini invades Ethiopia, and then Adolf Hitler expands and invades sends the military into Rhineland, and then invades Poland. And then Japan is going to invade northern China and Manchuria and try to take over there, and then throughout Asia and those little islands is trying to expand out there to get those natural resources it needs to try to colonize there in Asia and in the Pacific. So this is what causes World War II. So let's look at Germany and Hitler's expansion. Here we have a map here of Germany, and this little area here with the lines going through it, that's what we call the Rhineland, the demilitarized zone. In the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I, Germany promised not to go into the Rhineland with the military, and that's exactly what Adolf Hitler did with his military. He sent them into the Rhineland, which is a violation of the Treaty of Versailles. The League of Nations and Great Britain and France at that moment didn't do anything about it. They held this policy called appeasement, where they just let Hitler go do it anyway. They didn't react in any way. But it's when Hitler later on invaded Poland that France and Great Britain got concerned and declared war on Germany. Alright, so that's Hitler and his expansion. And then Benito Mussolini down here in the African continent, the country of Ethiopia here. Italy and Benito Mussolini are going to invade Ethiopia and try to colonize it. So that's Italy's expansion. And then Japan attacks northern China and starts the I think it's called the Sino-Japanese War. It's the war between Japan and China, and then invades Manchuria as well, and then all these islands, what becomes Vietnam, French Indochina, Siam and Burma, all these areas, the Philippines, and starts taking over all these islands out here. And that's where we're going to get to how we enter the war here. That's what Japan does over in the Pacific. Alright, so the United States, where was the United States at during this time? Well, we were in a state of isolationism. If you recall, Woodrow Wilson's Treaty of Versailles League of Nations, 14 points, were not approved by the Senate, and from 1919 till 1941, December 7th, 1941, the United States is going to remain isolated from this World War II stuff that's going over in Europe. They don't want no part of it at all. Now, FDR is going to want to help Great Britain when it's being attacked, but a lot of people in the United States kind of resist that and pull him back and say no. And we talked about the Neutrality Acts already. We're about to talk about that in a few more moments in the next video. But here's World War II. It's going to last from it's going to start in 1939 in Europe, and it's going to last until 1945. But the United States is not going to enter until 1942. This might look familiar because it's the same thing I did with World War I. In this one, we're going to be brought in 1940, actually December 7th, 1941. 42, we are aggressively in the war. Let's see. World War II. From 1939 to 1942, we maintain our neutrality, our isolationism, because of this peak here, and this is a change to timeline in our U.S. foreign policy. It's important for you to know that George Washington said we maintain neutrality, and then in 1898 expansionism was our foreign policy with big stick diplomacy, Theodore Roosevelt, and then after the war with Woodrow Wilson's 14 points League of Nations, we returned to isolationism and neutrality, and that's where we are now until Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. So, and a question would be, what caused the United States to go from neutrality or isolationism to engagement in World War II? We asked the same question in World War I. In this one, what's going to cause us to leave neutrality and enter the war in World War II is that the Japanese, in their expansionistic policy and taking over this area over here, are going to expand out to Hawaii and do a surprise attack on the United States there in Pearl Harbor. And we're going to look at that in the next video, or the following video. Alright, and I think that's it. I think we just talked about the origins of World War II, and it's a conflict and compromise, and we'll pick up in the next video there. Alright, ask questions in class. Good luck on the quiz, test, the EOCT. At home, how does World War II cause problems at home? We're going to look at that, especially the growth of the federal government. We're going to look at that too. So let's look at the whole thing altogether. We have A, B, C, D, E, F. So 19 is a huge standard here. World War II. It's under Unit 7 we've been talking about. So let's go ahead and jump into the first one here, the origins of World War II, and then we'll go to A after this video. Origins of World War II, something you should have learned in world history in 9th grade, but we're going to hit it here again to try to refresh your memory. Let's look at the element here. Origins of World War II. What caused World War II to happen? Why did it happen? Why did the United States enter? That's what we want to look at. Conflict and compromise is the theme. And again, we want to talk about how the United States got involved in World War II and how World War II started. The domestic impact of World War II. It's telling us what aspects of World War II that we need to know about. It's kind of narrowing them down for us and focusing on those, and that's what we need to do. Focus on the origins of World War II. We're going to do that first. Then we're going to come and talk about some major developments that happened in the war. And then at home, domestically, we talked about this word here again, domestically, the domestic impact of World War II. Okay, let's start Standard 19 here. Standard 19 says the student will identify the origins, major developments, and the domestic impact of World War II, especially the growth of the federal government. This is a big, tall order to give. This is a mouthful. So we break this down into origins, the major developments, the domestic itself over in Europe. So what's going to happen is, just like in World War I, we're going to have the Allied powers here, Great Britain, Russia, or Soviet Union, France here, and later on the United States. We're going to come in later, just like we always do. We drag in a little late. But here are the Allied powers. The Axis powers are